I will introduce you.
Okay.
You look like the rest of these young people running around here with your hoodie.
It's cold earlier. I'm always. That's okay. Yes. That's okay. Let me go ahead and start, do my skill. Pushpa. Yeah. Start. I just do it.
Okay, welcome everybody. If you're gonna come in and grab a seat. Muters, people on Zoom, you are muted. Please stay muted. At the end, in questions and answers, you can put your questions in the chat and I'll monitor that for you. If you're in the room and you have a cell phone, if you could please silence it, it would be greatly appreciated. And Pushpa is here and she is going to introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks, Pam. I guess you could hear me. Today's speaker is a very interesting topic. It's all about pain and nutrition as separate subjects. We are interested in these two topics, and then you put them together, and well, it's a winner. Dr. Tamargo is our speaker, Javier Tamargo. He's a postdoctoral fellow at UF, where he's affiliated with the Pain Research and Intervention Center of Excellence, the Institute of Aging, and the Claude Pepper Older Americans Independence Center. He's a board-certified, registered dietitian nutritionist and is currently fully dedicated to research focused on the intersection of pain and aging. With a strong belief that nutrition empowers older adults to take their health into their own hands, Dr. Tamargo is dedicated to advancing our understanding of how dietary interventions can improve the quality of life and manage chronic pain in older adults. He is particularly interested in how nutrition affects pain and function in aging and how nutrition-based interventions can help older adults lead healthier, more independent lives. Dr. Tamargo, take it away. Please welcome.
Thank you so much. That's a really good introduction. Thank you for having me. Do you hear it well? Okay, good. I do have a live voice, so I may end up over speaking over the microphone. But thank you so much for having me here today. It's a lovely place, lovely audience, and everybody at Zoom, thank you for attending as well. So yeah, my name is Javier Tamargo. I grew up in Puerto Rico. My family's Cuban, so I'm the first generation. And I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. That's what RDN stands for. I know it can be confusing with RN, so we think of nursing, and we were having a chat over here about that. But the reason that I use, so our profession, we can use RD as registered dietitian or RDN. And the reason I use the N is because the title of nutritionist, unfortunately, is not legally binding. Anyone can claim to be a nutritionist. And in fact, they do, and they charge for services that they have they're practicing illegally. And so I want to claim back that N, that nutrition. So if you do seek out professional services for nutrition, you need to see a registered dietitian. That is someone that has a master's level degree in nutrition. They completed a residency and they got board approved a very difficult exam. So I've been in academia now for a while, and I'm doing a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Florida focused on pain and aging, which it's been fascinating for me. My dad was an older adult. He was 59 when I was born. So aging and issues of older adults are very dear to me because that was my dad, and that's everything I lived. And to me, that was totally normal. But eventually, I saw him decay from Alzheimer's disease, unfortunately. At the time, it wasn't diagnosed very well. It still isn't. So it went undiagnosed for a very long time. And so all of these issues that I'm going to talk about today are very personal to me, as well as like I just have this academic interest, and it's very fascinating. So today I'm going to talk about um, pain. Basically, I want to talk about, teach you a little bit about what I know about pain, and then try to interlock it with nutrition. Unfortunately, I'm going to have more questions than answers, and I know that probably all of you came here for all these answers. But the truth is that both pain science and nutrition science are extremely difficult. And we're only beginning to understand both of them. So the intersection is even worse. And this is important to know because anyone out there claiming to know and claiming to have answers for you and solutions, they're probably not totally honest. So chronic pain so pain is this universal sensation to humans, and it's absolutely crucial, right? So pain protects us from danger. And what we see actually in children with congenital conditions where they don't sense pain, they don't survive very long. So pain, despite having this negative effect to it, is absolutely crucial for our survival. Now, when pain goes from acute to chronic, which generally we consider that being 3 months or longer, but it could depend on the situation. So for instance, if you injure your finger, a small cut, you expect that to go away maybe within a few hours. But if it's starting to last much longer than it should heal, then this is becoming a chronic problem. But generally speaking, overall, we consider chronic pain as pain that lasts for 3 months or longer. And by definition, it is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience. So it's both somasomatic, meaning it's very real, there's something going on physically, but it's also experienced emotionally. And that adds to the confusion and the complexity of understanding pain. And on top of that, the actual definition says, so it's an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage, or describe the terms in such damage. That could not be possibly more vague, right? So if this is the actual definition, just understand how difficult it is to describe pain. But it's really important to understand the actual or potential, because that means if we cannot see the source of your pain, that doesn't invalidate your pain. You still have pain, and I'm depending on you to tell me. And it depends on us, the whole clinical medical profession, to trust in what people are telling us. And in fact, the new diagnostic codes recognize pain, chronic pain, as its own condition. It's its own disease. And it can be primary, meaning it's not associated with another disease, or it can be secondary, associated with osteoarthritis or something else. It's the most common chronic health problem, one in the world, and especially among older adults. You can see that the prevalence of chronic pain, and this was only started to get tracked regularly by the US government recently. You can see that the prevalence increases, and especially common starting in middle age, and then it peaks the older that you get. And these are probably underestimates. This is self-reported, so I tend to believe that it's accurate, but there could be issues with underreporting or not having access to certain populations. And the truth is that in research, we struggle to find no pain comparisons. So people without pain are much harder to find. So I think the real number is closer to 2/3 than 1/3. Now, there are three main etiologies or sources of pain. Noci means the pain, and we have all of these pain receptors, nociceptors in us. We have receptors for mechanical pain, so meaning like some sort of touch. We have receptors for heat pain, cold pain, everything. Now, the primary condition that most of us think of as pain is what we call nociceptive. And this is when we have some sort of tissue damage or injury. It's the most what we affiliate with pain because that's what we grow up with. And this is usually described as sharp, aching, throbbing, and it's very common in musculoskeletal conditions like osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and injuries. The next one is relatively common as well. It's neuropathic pain. This is some damage to the nervous system, so your nerves. And this usually gets described in a very different way. So it could be burning. So it's more common that it's extremely hot, like burning pain, but it could also be like cold. And if it's too cold, it can also feel like burning. It could feel like shooting, so it goes from one place to another. Sciatic pain, for example, that you feel it from your waist pretty much, and then it runs down your leg. That's a type of neuropathic pain. And tingling, it kind of like it feels like something's there and you don't know what's happening. So this is very common with diabetic neuropathy, central nervous system disorders, and cancer treatment. Then the third category is relatively recent, and it's called nociplastic. You may be familiar with the concept of plasticity, especially when it comes to the nervous system and the brain, neuroplasticity. And it means that the body kind of adapts and changes, both in positive and negative ways. And basically, this category is like, we have no idea. We just don't know. You're telling us you have pain. You've had all this pain for this amount of time. We're doing all of these scanning. We can do x-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, everything, and we don't see anything. That's very common with chronic low back pain and some other conditions like fibromyalgia, which is throughout the body. And that we just don't see evidence of tissue damage, but you still have pain. So our best understanding of pain, and whenever I talk about pain, I'm mostly referring to chronic pain. So we understand it as a multidimensional problem, and our best model to understand pain is what we call the biopsychosocial model. It's not unique to pain. There's a biopsychosocial model of health, but we have one that's specific to pain. And basically, it says that to best understand pain, we have to understand that it's an interaction between biological factors, psychological, and social factors. So it's emotional, it's physical, and there's environmental factors that influence how people experience pain. And at the end of the day, like I was talking about, we depend on you telling us your experience of pain. So how do you rate your pain? At the end of the day, that's how we know. So pain, so the reason I'm explaining this is because I have I think, relatively novel approach to nutrition for pain. The idea is that we kind of grow up thinking of pain as this thing related to an injury, right? So we think of it as being in the periphery, like our extremities. But the reality is that pain signals are sent, let's say your knee, through the spinal cord to your brain, and your brain is the organ that actually experiences pain. So pain treatments kind of disrupt that connection somewhere, and that's how you relieve pain. So the pain is not sensed by the knee, sensed by the brain. So if we start thinking of pain as a brain neurological issue, then we might be getting closer to finding answers, to understanding it and to treat it. So, so pain is processed in the brain. Pain signals are sent through the spinal cord into the brain, and we can observe through different stimuli, different testing methods, that people can experience a sensitization to these pain receptors and signals being sent. So basically, you become overly sensitive, and now you're more susceptible to having a chronic pain experience, a more severe pain experience. And this is all related, all linked to neuroplastic changes to the brain. So we see that the changes with pain. And we have this endogenous pain modulatory system. Endogenous means that it's innate in us. We have it in us. And generally speaking, we have an ascending pain pathway, which is the signals that are sent from the tissue to the brain. It's ascending. And those tend to be facilitatory, meaning that they increase the pain sensation, right? Because they're going from the periphery to the brain. Then the brain sends descending signals, which tend to be inhibitory. So the brain is trying to relieve the source of the pain. So we have ascending and descending. And this could tend to relate to what we call pro-nociceptive or anti-nociceptive profiles. So what we see with chronic pain conditions is that there's a more pro-nociceptive profile, and this is what we see with aging as well. So as we get older, we see a shift of your pain modulatory system towards a more pro-nociceptive profile. So you're a little bit more, you tend to have more facilitation, meaning more ascending signals, and fewer or less capable descending signals to inhibit your pain. So now you've shifted your pain modulation towards pro-nociception, pro-pain. It could result as more frequent pain, more enhanced severe pain. And this is thought to contribute to the vulnerability of older adults to suffer from chronic pain. And if we compare within older adults, those with chronic pain, we see that these changes are more drastic, which is evidence that this is in fact what's happening. Now, because now we understand pain as a brain issue, I don't like calling it necessarily a disorder, but it's definitely a disease. Then we can also start to observe that pain alters brain functions. So we see neurochemical alterations that affect your mood and mental functions. There's some work on that, not as much as there should be. We see that your mental health is affected by chronic pain. This is also is both biological and emotional. There's a huge relationship between chronic pain and depression, and that kind of makes sense. If you have this type of disabling chronic pain that doesn't let you live your life as you want to, it could tend to be depressive, right? And we see associations with cognitive decline and cognitive impairment, which is an area that I'm particularly interested in, and I'm gonna talk about some of my research on that. So we just conducted an analysis in 10,000 individuals, and generally speaking, I just summarized it in one figure, but lately in the last maybe 2 decades, a phenomenon called subjective cognitive decline has sparked up in the literature about dementia, which is basically a period during the preclinical phase of any neurologic disorder like Alzheimer's disease. It's basically when you're asymptomatic, but we know that to get to the end, when you have the disease, something has already been happening for like 20 years. So people who self-report that their memory, usually is memory, their memory is deteriorating. But if I put you through a cognitive test, a battery, we don't see it, right? This is very similar to pain, which is you're reporting something that we cannot observe through our technology and our scientific methods. Those that report it tend to have a higher risk of developing the disease later on. So it's not observable by any tangible means, but if you report it, there's something going on. It's real. What we see in our analysis is that pain, and specifically pain that limits activities and function. It's, if you tell me you have chronic pain, for example, you could have a shoulder pain, but that doesn't restrict you from walking, engaging with your family, doing the things that you love, but you have it, it's there all the time, right? So you report it, but it's not what we call high impact. Versus knee pain that prevents you from walking as much as you love, doing work, doing activities that you want to. That's what we call high impact chronic pain. So what we see is that high impact chronic pain precedes even the subjective experience of cognitive decline. So it's we're proposing chronic pain, and specifically high impact chronic pain, as a major risk factor for cognitive decline that comes even people report issues with memory. And this is under review that I'm going to be presenting this research at the end of the month at a national conference, and it's under review in the Journal of Pain. So now we get to what you're all most interested in, which is nutrition and how it all relates to pain. So the truth is that our diet provides essential nutrients that support brain health, right? So this is not even a question. We are built out of what we eat. We really are what we eat. But specifically to your brain health, the nutrition supports our mental functions. It supports our brain structurally. So actually omega-3 fatty acids, which are a type of fatty acid that needs to be obtained in this diet. We don't produce it ourselves. So we need to get it through the diet. It comprises a specific type of omega-3 fatty acid called DHA. It's what our brain is made out of. A big portion of our brain is made out of this fatty acid, and we need to get it through our diet. So it's critical during infancy, when our brains are actually all childhood, when our brains are still developing, but then as we continue to live our lives, it provides structural support and enhances our ability. So we need to maintain that DHA there. And if we start losing it because we're not consuming it through our diet, then we see alterations to your mental functions because it's actually changing your brain. B vitamins are very important, all of them. And of course, nutrition is a big source of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents. So all of that plays a role in your brain function. Nutrition is also a major factor in your vascular health. And it's usually what people mostly talk about with nutrition is cardiovascular issues, heart disease, but your cardiovascular health is very important for your mental health. And in fact, the biggest biological risk factor that we know of for mental decline, specifically in Alzheimer's, is an apolipoprotein E, ApoE, and that is a protein that controls cholesterol. So the two are very interrelated, and nutrition is critical for your cardiovascular health through both iron, which is part of your hemoglobin and circulates oxygen throughout the body, and everything else related to your cardiovascular health. And overall, nutrition is a major source of disease prevention. Personally, I don't think of nutrition as a thing to prevent disease. I think nutrition is essential for your health. And that is the baseline, right? We just become less healthy with time, but we don't necessarily use nutrition to enhance health. We kind of use nutrition because that's what our bodies demand, and we're just supplying it with what it needs. And then chronic inflammation is a hallmark of aging, so it's just gonna tend to happen. And nutrition is one of the main things that we can use to alleviate this systemic chronic inflammation. Another important factor in your brain health connected to nutrition is your gut, so your intestinal system. So there's something called the gut-brain axis. And the truth is that, so they say trust your gut, it's actually your second brain. So your gut is directly connected through the nervous system to your brain. And the things that we eat actually alter the signals that are sent from the intestinal system to our brain. So diets rich in fiber, fermented foods, probiotics, all of that can help sustain a more healthy intestinal gut system, microbiome, all the bacteria that are reside in the intestinal tract, which all of that is going to support your brain health. So generally speaking, those are two main things that relate to nutrition that can support your brain health. And there has been a growing awareness of nutrition impacting pain, but honestly, it's been largely overlooked, which is good for someone like me starting their career because it provides a pocket where I can make a career out of it. But unfortunately, it's not great for people who suffer from pain. And within the research that is there, older adults have been disproportionately overlooked because older adults are the ones suffering from chronic pain the most. But unfortunately, there's very little research that has been done when it comes to nutrition and pain in older adults. So generally speaking, the figure to the left, you can see that some investigators did a literature review, and they saw that nutrition issues of many ways have been associated with all sorts of pain conditions. And then to the right, you see a model of the potential ways that we think nutrition impacts pain. The first one there is inflammation and oxidative stress. That's kind of a go-to for people. It's very easy to talk about, and it is very relevant, but I hope to convince you today that we should care less about inflammation and more about the brain when it comes to pain. The second one is the gut-brain axis, which I just talked about. Then you have glucose metabolism and lipid disorders. So this is just metabolism, which is a major source of disease and poor health. Our diets have deteriorated over time, unfortunately. We have an obesity epidemic, which is the next risk factor. So all of this is very directly linked with nutrition. In fact, nutrition is the first, well, unfortunately, they prescribe medications for everything nowadays. But when it comes to being able to do something yourself about it, nutrition is the first thing that you should address to relieve all of these things. The last one is genetics and epigenetics. So I do some work in epigenetics, and that's one of my major interests, to focus in that specific area. But there's a lot of talk about epigenetics lately, and people get it all wrong. So basically, we have the DNA code, which doesn't change throughout our lives. It's stable, generally stable, and that makes up who we are. Now, epi means on top of, right? So the epigenome, epigenetic modifications to our genetic code, they are structural changes that alter how genes are expressed. So they shut them off or on. And that's actually what becomes us. Those are the hormones that are produced, that's everything. So there's the underlying genetic code, and then the epigenome says what gets turned on and off. And nutrition is one of the key ways that we can, that affects that. And actually we see that with aging, one of the things that happens with aging, just because that's nature, is that the epigenome alters with time. And nutrition is one of the ways that we can actually revert or make some changes on that that can be beneficial. So I'm gonna try, sorry. I'm gonna try to provide some guidance as to approaches that could help relieve pain with nutrition, because that's probably what most of you are interested in. But I will say, like I just told you, unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of research on this, and there's more questions than answers. But the good thing about nutrition is that it's holistic. So good nutrition is good nutrition no matter what. Now we could identify, and that's what I'm hoping to do, is identify specific nutritional interventions that can help with pain, brain health, and all that. But generally speaking, good nutrition is good nutrition. It's gonna help with everything, not just one thing. So my idea is that I can treat, for example, both chronic pain and cognitive decline at the same time by targeting the brain with nutrition. I'm hoping to make a whole career out of it, so let's see if I'm onto something. So Michael Pollan, who probably all of you know, he's an excellent writer, journalist. He's just a beautiful writer. He wrote a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma that I recommend everybody to read. But he has this quote that I absolutely love. It's called, he says, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." And honestly, you have all this guidance from the government and all these people selling books and diets and everything. If we just listen to that quote and kind of get closer to it, just try to get closer to eat real food, not too much, mostly plants, we would all be better off. But we still want to get a little bit more specific. So generally speaking, anti-inflammatory diets are those that focus on whole foods. Whole foods are what we recognize intuitively, right? It's your fruits, vegetables, your meats, poultry, all that. It's the stuff that has the least interference between what's in nature and what's in our plate. Then anti-inflammatory diets tend to be mostly plants, and that includes vegetables, fruits, grains, anything, legumes, all of that. And healthy fats, which I'll talk a little bit more about. A healthy diet provides an adequate intake of vitamins and minerals, which what we call micronutrients. So at the end of the day, we need energy, and a lot of the discussion about diets is about calories. But the truth is that what matters most in our diet is the nutrients that we get from it, because every 10 years, we are a whole new person. Every cell in our body is a whole different, has been replaced every 10 years or so. And those cells are made out of what we eat. So we literally are what we eat. Your nutrition is clearly important to maintain your health, your weight, and that's mostly through calories. Just want to make sure we're good on time. It's very important to stay well hydrated. Unfortunately, this is very overlooked. It's not talked about often, but it's extremely important when it comes to pain. So we actually know that if you're subhydrated, so there's clinical dehydration, and this is like life-threatening. What is actually very prevalent, especially in older adults, is that they're suboptimally hydrated. They're somewhere between having a good hydration level that supports health and being clinically dehydrated, where we actually have to intervene and put an IV and all that. So it's actually very common that they're suboptimally hydrated. And what happens is that the poor hydration enhances the pain signals in our ascending pathway. So they can actually make make you more sensitive to pain. So it enhances pain sensitivity. And if you're chronically suboptimally hydrated, then your pain is worse. So all of that is to to consider. Now, so some guidelines, and we can discuss more, but I'm gonna do my best to provide you with the best advice that we have at the moment. Generally speaking, the good thing is that what's good for the heart is good for the brain as well. So this is really, what happened there? What's that mean? Okay, so it's all good. Okay, so the first major recommendation is to limit highly processed foods. So there's a lot of talk now about ultra processed foods. In the whole world of nutrition, there's all these terminology that are poorly defined: superfoods, functional foods, ultra processed, processed, everything. These are not generally well-defined terms, but generally speaking, processed foods are things that we have to make. We cannot find them in nature, right? We have to make them. And it doesn't necessarily make them bad, right? But generally speaking, the more processed foods that we have in our diet, the more the poorer quality diets. So they do have a place, but we ideally want to limit. So some of the bigger factors that I would say are things to look at is added sugar in the processed foods. So sugar, unfortunately, is very palatable. It's highly desirable, but it offers very little nutrition. It offers energy, but it doesn't come with any nutrition. So it doesn't have vitamins, minerals, like it's sugar, it's just sugar. Now, trans fats are definitely harmful. They are the result of the first versions of margarine when we got too scared about saturated fat, meaning fats that come from animals. That's back in the 70s with Ansel Keys. And we got a little too afraid of saturated fats. And then we started making artificial butter, margarine. And the method that they used, that they turned vegetable oils, which tend to be oils, right, liquid, and they made it solid through this process of hydrogenation. And they ended up creating these trans fatty acids. And they turned out to be extremely harmful for our health. So they had to be cut out. Now, by law, no food products can be sold with trans fats. That doesn't mean that trans fats don't exist. They're just trace amounts. They actually occur naturally from cooking. But this high amount of trans fats cannot be in any product. But again, that's an example of a processed foods not being less health conducing than the real thing, which would, back in the day, it would have been better off for you to consume lard than margarine, right? And we don't really recognize lard as this super healthy fat. Now, fats that are healthy for you: extra virgin olive oil. There's tons of research supporting it. That's mostly this type of fat that we call monounsaturated. So it's structurally different from the animal fats. And then we have the fats from nuts and fatty fish, especially. So omega-3 fatty acids, which is what I was mentioning before. And I'll talk a little bit later when I get to my study. Those are mostly obtained from seafood. And polyphenols are just these plant chemicals, and those tend to be anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, so it's highly beneficial. The dietary guidelines for Americans, I like to introduce it. This is the general guidelines that are there to meet the nutrient needs of most Americans. There's political game involved and everything, so I don't think any of us in the science and in the profession of dietetics think that this is like therapeutic. But generally speaking, if the general public would eat more like this, they would still be better off. So I think it's important to talk about. So generally speaking, they recommend to make half of your plate vegetables and fruits. So fruits tend to not go all that great with a plate, but it generally means that half of what you consume throughout the day should be made of plants, fruits and vegetables. Now, another quarter of your plate should be grains. Whole grains are ideal. That's your brown rice, quinoa, whole wheat bread, things like that. And then vary your protein. And you can consume seafood, poultry, meat, eggs. Eggs are okay now. They will always were okay. We just got confused along the way, a couple of times actually. Beans, peas, lentils, all those legumes are excellent sources of protein and fiber as well. So you can get your protein from a lot of different things. And then the guidelines do recommend dairy, specifically low-fat, fat-free dairy, milk, and yogurt. I kind of disagree a little bit with that. So dairy it's a good, excellent source of calcium because the lactose, which is the sugar in milk, actually enhances the absorption of the calcium. So not only is it high in calcium, it's also allows for the absorption better. And in older adults, osteoporosis is an issue. So, so there is a place for dairy in the older adult diet. Generally speaking, the science, as little as there is, but the literature will say that two main dietary patterns are associated with better pain outcomes and brain health. Those are Mediterranean style diets. You could see them called Mediterranean diet, but we're not in the Mediterranean. And if we eat that diet, it's not Mediterranean, it's just Mediterranean style. But generally, those diets will emphasize fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and healthy fats, just like I was mentioning. It has a moderate amount of protein from fish and poultry, and very limited red meat and sweets. So it's quite different from the standard American diet. The next diet that is very well supported by the literature, not necessarily with pain, but specifically with cardiovascular outcomes, is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, or better known as DASH diet. So the DASH diet was developed specifically to target hypertension, which over 60% of older adults at the age of middle age, actually, you start to get like 60% of people with it, and it gets as high as 90% with hypertension over 75. So it's very common, and this diet has been very well supported by the literature. Now, more novel, more recently, investigators at Rush University looked at the dementia literature specifically, and they developed this new diet, which is Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay, or MIND diet. And this diet kind of combines elements from Mediterranean and DASH, and it adds some specific guidelines. It is all entirely based on the literature, on the scientific literature. It's nothing that anyone came up. So it is limited by that because science is not perfect and it's not entire, but at least it's empirical, meaning that it's not based on people's opinions. It's entirely based on what we currently know from the dementia literature. So actually this figure is not that great, but generally speaking, half of your plate, actually so you can see the figure, but it's not that great. We'll get into the specific recommendations. Now, because this diet has shown, so it's mostly been observational research. There hasn't been a lot of clinical trials, but from the studies that are available, people who adhere to this diet pattern tend to be more protected against neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's than people who adhere to a Mediterranean style diet only, or the DASH diet, or any other diet actually. So I saw this literature and I thought maybe it's better for chronic pain as well. I proposed a study, but we'll see if I get it funded. So the MIND diet, these are the guidelines, and they're quite specific, which is what I like about it, because now I can give you something that you can work towards instead of saying, oh, just eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, limit your red meat, right? It's not quantifiable. So this diet actually tells you specifically how much to eat and how much to not eat of certain things. So it says 6 or more weekly servings of green leafy vegetables, and you know what those are: spinach, your kales, all that stuff. Then 1 serving or more of other vegetables. So anything that is not a leafy green, that could be broccoli, carrots, anything else. So that's pretty simple, right? Other foods to include: 5 or more servings of nuts. A serving is actually a closed fistful, not an open fistful like I would eat. So fats, the nuts go a long way. And if you think in nature, they're not easily accessible. We have to work hard for them. So they're not meant to be eaten by the bowl, but a closed handful is a serving. And it's, if you have 1 fistful of nuts a day, you're meeting this guideline. It's not that bad. 4 servings a week of beans. That's also not difficult. That's 4 lunches or 4 dinners. That's not that difficult. And there are so many sources of beans, you don't have to get bored. 3 or more servings of whole grains. We all eat bread very regularly. So if you make that whole grains, you'd be better off. But whole grains also are rice, quinoa, corn technically is a grain. So it's 3 or more. Again, very easy to meet. And I love this because it talks about what you should include in your diet. There's too much focus on what you shouldn't eat. I prefer to focus on what to eat, and that will end up displacing some of the stuff that we don't want. Other things to include, and these are very important: 2 or more servings of a week of berries. And so blueberries, tons of research, blueberries, and all the berries, but blueberries are very powerful antioxidants. So honestly, if you can include 1 serving of berries a day, you'd be great. Actually, after I read this and educated myself on this diet, I just started incorporating berries once a day in my breakfast. So I mix it with oatmeal, or I just eat it by itself. Strawberries, blueberries, all the berries, they're all great. 2 or more meals a week of poultry. So a serving size of protein is basically the palm of your hand. And that's a great guideline, because if you're a man, you have a slightly larger hand. If you're a woman, you have a slightly smaller. So the thickness and the width, the size of your palm, that's 1 serving. It's approximately 3 to 4 ounces of meat. That is 1 serving. So having 2 of those of chicken a week, not a day, right? That's not difficult. 1 or more of fish, and preferably a fatty fish like salmon, but any fish will do. Again, does this sound like very difficult to meet? If you just focus on 1 thing at a time, including it, getting used to it, then you go to the next thing. It's very easy to eat this diet. And then olive oil. If you're gonna add fat, which, for example, if you're having a salad, you definitely want to add a fat in there, an oil. It actually enhances the absorption of your micronutrients, so you want it there. So olive oil is supported by a lot of literature, and it's ideal. Now, some things to consume in moderation. So these are things where you can eat them, but you want to stop at some point. So again, I don't believe in restriction like this. You shouldn't eat this. That's not true. We don't die from eating cake or frappuccinos or anything 1 time. We get sick from eating it all the time, constantly. So less than 5 servings a week of pastries and sweets. That's 5. Okay, so the limit is 4. That's most days out of the week. So it's not that difficult to meet. Less than 4 servings a week of red meat. Again, most people start to cut it out, but this is not saying you can't have it. It's saying less than 4 servings a week. The one that hurts me the most is less than one serving a week of cheese and fried foods. So I don't eat fried foods, but the cheese hurts me, honestly. That's a painful one. I'm struggling with that one, I'm not gonna lie. And less than a tablespoon a day of butter or margarine. So again, I hope that you see this and you recognize that in totality, it could be difficult, but if you take it one step at a time, it's very doable. Now, before I end my talk, I'd like to go over some major ideas about nutrition that are said and discussed, but they're really largely myths. So first is a calorie is a calorie. So all that matters is the caloric intake. You don't need to look at what you eat. So this is not true because what I've talked about mostly is nutrients, right? So you could have two foods having the same caloric amount, same amount of energy, but their nutrition profile is entirely different. And so I have some examples here. You could have a handful of nuts, which I've talked about as being extremely healthy, or a handful of candy, and they have the same amount of calories, but from one you end up getting a lot of nutrition, from the other one you don't. The other one is supplements are necessary because our diets are so bad that we need to have supplements. So the supplement industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's huge, and it's not regulated by the FDA in any way. It's only regulated in the claims that they can make, and it's very obscure. They can still make tons of claims. So this is an industry where you don't know what you're getting necessarily. And the truth is that we live in a very privileged country where even our poor diets tend to give us too much energy and too much nutrition, but we don't really suffer from major deficiencies. So the truth is that most nutrients that we need to support our health can be obtained from our diet, but that has to be a more balanced diet, like what I've been talking about, not eating Big Macs all day. The next one is very common. Carbs are bad for you. So no, carbohydrates are anything plant-based, pretty much. So our brain consumes 20% of all the energy that we consume in a day. And so if we're lying flat on our bed, we're still consuming calories from our brain, from thinking. And glucose, which is the main source of carbohydrate that we use in our body, is a main source of fuel for our body. So carbohydrates are important. Cutting them out completely is not really helpful. The next one, if carbs are not the enemy, then fat is the enemy. So the truth is, like I've been talking about, 20 to 35% of your diet should come, of your energy should come from fat. Now, fat goes a long way, so a small amount provides a lot of calories, but we need fat in our diet. It's helpful for you. And especially, there are omega-3 fatty acids that need to be consumed through the diet because we don't make them, and that's a source of fat. Okay, so I do have a study, but I want to leave time for questions. But basically, I have a clinical trial where we use krill oil, which is it's a source of omega-3 fatty acids, similar to fish oil, but for many reasons, it's better. So the omega-3 fatty acids are better absorbed. So we're looking to see if it helps with pain and mobility in older adults. It's a clinical trial. We're looking for 40 individuals. Some of the eligibility factors are older adult with chronic pain of the hips, knees, or lower back, so musculoskeletal. And if your pain affects your movement in any way, then you are likely eligible. And you're not eligible if you consume omega-3 supplements, if you have a coagulation or bleeding disorder, or if you're taking any anticoagulant or antiplatelet medication. The reason for that is that any omega-3 supplement, omega-3s are antiplatelets. So actually, most of the literature on omega-3 supplementation is related to cardiovascular disease. because they're anti-inflammatory, which is great, but they're also antiplatelet. So if you have any sort of coagulation, bleeding issue, if you're already taking anticoagulants, then fish oil or any omega-3 supplement on top of that could increase your risk of bleeding. I have a QR code if you want to scan it real quick, and we can contact you and tell you more about the study. But just to conclude, pain is directly related to your brain health. Nutrition affects both your pain and your brain. It is never too late to improve your health through nutrition. And this is what Pushpa mentioned in my introduction. Is I just believe that nutrition is the one thing that you can do, no matter your physical status, right? If you're disabled or not, you can control what you eat. So I think it's a major source of empowerment for you to take care of your own health. And diets like the Mediterranean styles or the Mind diet could be particularly helpful for pain and your brain health. With that, thank you so much for listening to me. And I'll take any questions now.
Thank you.
I went 4 minutes over, but I don't think they're hearing you.
Now I'm on. Okay, questions? Susan.
But I bet on Zoom too.
Nuts are recommended in many eating programs, right? Nuts. What about people? What do people do who are allergic to tree nuts and peanuts? What can we substitute?
I wouldn't think about substituting. Just follow every other guideline. Yeah. They're great sources of nutrients, but if you can't consume them for whatever reason, then focus on the other things. Yeah.
You had some very nice slides and the way you were projecting your data. Is there actually any evidence that the Mind diet delays or prevents Alzheimer's or neurodegeneration?
Yeah, so unfortunately, most of the the data that supports it is observational, meaning we just look at data that we have, we look at the diet that you report, and then we see what happens over time. We don't intervene in any way. That data supports the Mind diet very strongly. However, there was one big clinical trial done in Rush University, and actually the PI for that is one of my mentors for my transitioning grant, and that enrolled older adults whose cognitive status was normal, meaning that with testing we don't see anything, and they did not see difference between the Mind diet and a controlled diet of portion control over 3 years. However, I wouldn't say that that's strong evidence that it doesn't work. It's because
So-
the people who they studied are not at the highest risk.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so it's anecdotal or just correlational between
So
the
far,
Mind
I
diet.
would say that
not,
the diet, the data right now, the evidence is correlation. Yes.
yeah, okay.
There's okay.
Thank you for your talk, Javier.
Thank you.
A fact, the older I get, the less I eat. What's your recommendation? Cut down everything in proportion or just knock off on some of the categories? Because if I ate everything you recommended, I'd be about 225 instead of just 180.
So, that's a great point. It is true that as we age, we eat less amount. So the focus would be on eating nutrient dense foods. Unfortunately, so nutrient dense means that it packs a lot of nutrition, but fewer calories in comparison. So unfortunately, vegetables are very difficult they're great when you're trying to lose weight because they fill you up and they're packed with nutrition, but they don't carry a lot of calories. But if you can't eat a lot, it's difficult to do that. So for older adults, I would say that things that become easier to consume, for example, you can make things into smoothies. Uh, uh, Generally speaking, we don't want to consume our calories in liquid because it's so easy to consume. But the same strategy that is harmful to you when you're younger and makes you gain weight is excellent for you when you're older and you don't want to consume a lot of, you can't eat a lot, bulk. So make things much easier. Mash your potatoes, even your vegetables. You can make cauliflower mash, for example, use smoothies, things like that. Yeah, but that's an excellent point, actually. Yeah.
Okay, Javier, there are questions up there. First
Can
one
pain
is,
occur?
can
occur
pain
without-
occur without damage to tissue?
So this is what we call nociplastic pain that I mentioned. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some damage somewhere. It means that we can't see it with our available methods. So yes, but for example, if your pain receptors are sending this chronic signal without some obvious source, there is actual damage, but
Yeah.
the definition of chronic pain is that it's actual or potential damage. So
Yeah.
which is better, low fat,
No.
or whole milk yogurt?
First, what about chemicals,
sorry.
pesticides, herbicides, and the health impacts of these chemicals?
Honestly, it's overstated in my opinion. I think definitely concerns out there, but the bigger problem that we have is that people are eating too many burgers, too much fast food, too much processed foods, and fewer whole foods. So if people eat more whole foods, let's think about the pesticides later. Let's eat real food first, and then we can talk about the chemicals. People are not dying from pesticide toxicity. They're dying from being obese. It's
That's
just
true.
that.
Yeah. And then which is better, low fat or whole milk yogurt?
So I will tend to say not necessarily whole milk, but some fat in the diet is good, like I said. And low fat generally tends to say high sugar, because if you take the texture and the tastiness of fat, you remove it, you have to put something to make it good, and that ends up being sugar. And sugar is much more harmful than fat.
Are frozen vegetables more nutritious?
Frozen vegetables actually can be more nutrition than fresh because they are quick frozen. So they're collected and immediately chilled. So they actually have the most concentration of nutrients compared to something that gets shipped over a few weeks. It's picked early and then it ripens through the shipping process. So I would say any vegetables that you eat, no matter if it's canned or not, no matter they're all good. Eat more vegetables. We can talk about the specifics later.
Okay. And then cheese. Why is cheese bad? Is one.
I
The
disagree
second is,
entirely.
why isn't cheese considered a dairy serving? Two questions on cheese.
So cheese is considered a dairy serving by the US guidelines. What I was talking about is in the MIND diet. So unfortunately, the available evidence does not support the consumption of cheese when it comes to brain health. But I plan to making my whole life endeavor to prove that wrong. Just because that's my bias. I want cheese in my diet.
Is it because it affects cholesterol levels? Does it not?
Not that much
Increase-
actually. So cholesterol now, the reason that eggs are back on the menu is because we've understood now that our diets don't affect our cholesterol as much as we thought. It's mostly an endogenous process and overall our health. But it's not like we consume something with cholesterol and that it ends up in our blood. It's not like that. Most of the cholesterol in our blood is cholesterol that we made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
the issue with cheese is that it's saturated fat. We eat it too much. But cheese is, there are all sorts of cheeses, and I personally think that it's wonderful in a diet, and you should enjoy your diet. So not eat it all the time as I do, not eat the entire block as I do, but enjoy it with a salad, sure.
Yeah. Is there a question here? And then I'll go back to those.
Could you comment on MCT oils? They're now up and coming and recommended oils to use.
You guys are a high level audience. This is great. So MCTs are medium chain triglycerides. They are saturated fatty acids, but they're smaller structurally than long chain fatty acids, which is what we usually consume with animal fats. So MCTs are purported to have all these benefits because they're smaller and people think, oh, they don't contribute to plaque as much and things like that. At the end of the day, it's fat, it's saturated fat. There's very little evidence to support all the claims that people make about it.
The
You'd
one
still be
I-
better off consuming olive oil, for example.
Yeah, the one I saw about MTT was that it affects mitochondrial function and increases and it's
Yeah,
good.
but so
good for
again,
you.
all of that,
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff is shown in vitro models, meaning in a cell
Yeah.
culture or maybe in a rodent. But when it comes to humans, it's very difficult to have major effects like that that are observable. So it's all about our overall diet pattern, not one thing that we do.
Of the three diets we discussed, is there one that is most recommended by physicians? You know, like Mediterranean or DASH or MIND? Is there one?
So
that stands
probably,
out?
actually, that's a good question. I don't know about physicians, but I'm prone to think DASH. One, because it's more compatible with the American style of eating. Also, because it's very well supported for hypertension and cardiovascular disease, which are, hypertension is extremely common in older adults. And the main reason that we are dying in the world is cardiovascular disease. But
Okay.
the evidence for Mediterranean style diets is actually a bit better.
Probably more. Yeah, okay, let's see here. Please comment on vegetarian and vegan diets.
So I'm not a proponent of vegan diets, except in the if the reason for you to engage in that diet is moral, it's just your values. That is entirely valid. But as far as a health reason to consume vegan, it's not well supported by science, and in fact, it can lead to nutrient deficiencies. A major one is B12. B12 is absolutely essential in our diet, and it comes from animals. It has to come from animals. So if you're doing a vegan diet, you have to supplement. And if you have to supplement your diet, that's telling you something, that the diet somehow is not matching your biology perfectly, right? So that's an indication. It doesn't mean that it is bad, but a vegan diet has to be well planned out. And unfortunately, a lot of people do it wrong. Now, vegetarian, that means that it's a little bit more flexible. Sorry, I didn't define vegan. I think most of us know, but vegan means no animal products of any type, any type. Vegetarian, it can be a lot more flexible. Some consume fish, some don't, some consume eggs, some consume dairy. It's a little bit more flexible. Again, same as vegan, you have to plan it out well. But the risk of deficiencies is much lower with vegetarian.
Yeah. And then the multivitamins, are multivitamins important for older people?
Yeah,
That's the-
unfortunately, so one of my myths was that supplements are important. So doctors recommend multivitamins just out of this notion that our diets are not good enough, that you need them, and that they're not harmful. Unfortunately, that's not true. So multivitamins are actually a major source of toxicity that we see. So most of toxicity issues that we see in emergency rooms come from supplementation. And a big thing with this is a multivitamin is going to have 1,000% of everything that you need. Some of these are passed through the urine very easily. Some of them don't. A lot of them don't. So for example, you have fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin E. These are vitamins that dissolve in fat. They are not passed through the urine. So they accumulate. And you have all of the minerals, which are metals. You have all of them, zinc, magnesium. Those accumulate. Iron accumulates in our tissues, and we see harm from that. So no, I think we should get our nutrition through the diet. And the great thing is that the intestinal tract, our whole body knows the pace at which it should be absorbed. It controls the process much better. With supplementation, we usually, if you see the dosage, is much higher. It seems really high, and it's because it doesn't get absorbed very well. So then they give you more of it. So no, I don't think it's necessary, but there's a place for it.
So basically, we get all our vitamins from food except for vitamin B if we are vegetarian.
B12.
B12.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, last question here.
Research available that indicates that the older you get, the more you want sweets.
I wonder, you know, it's probably true, but I'm not aware of any. So I'll just say real quick that at the end of my master's, I got really interested in food addiction because there was a lot of literature popping up. I'm not sold by it, but it is entirely true that our reward system, the dopaminergic reward system, was entirely built through evolution for food. And this is what drugs of abuse hijack. So what we see when we consume sugar is that it spikes dopamine always equally. Now, if you love broccoli, for example, you can eat it and you enjoy it. But if you eat it all the time, you're gonna get a little bored of it. It's not gonna give you the same pleasure. But if you consume a sugary pastry, every time it's gonna be amazing, right? Every single time equally amazing. That is because it raises dopamine in your brain. And there could be something with aging that we seek that reward a little bit more. Is it addictive? Not really. People overstate it. But I'll stick around if you have more questions and you want to ask. But
Yeah, let's, it's be past the time. So thank you very much, Javier.
Thank you all.
You can come up and, yeah, thank you.
I'll come
for
over.
coming.